There were so many people at Bondi that day, people that will be impacted for a very long time, probably many forever. And I just wanted to say on behalf of my community in Hughes, I wanted to pay particular tribute to the victims, may they rest in peace, and extend compassion and sympathy to all those affected, and to let them know that they are in our thoughts today and will be into the future.
Thank you. The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on this condolence motion, and I want to mention first of all and thank all of those members who have already spoken on this, from the Prime Minister, the Opposition Leader, the member for Wentworth, and I was also fortunate to be in this place when I heard from both the member for Chifley and also the member for Kingsford Smith, who both who had a couple of the victims living in their respective local communities. And Deputy Speaker, on the afternoon of Saturday the 13th of April, it was just a month ago, a tragedy unfolded at Westfield Bondi in my hometown of Sydney. And on that afternoon, lives were changed forever in only a couple of minutes of madness but utter devastation. And for many of us, we often spend, many in my community, we spend our Saturday afternoons the way that these victims were. We're shopping, we are going to the movies, we're running last-minute errands, we're having coffees, catching up with friends, having lunch, and so it was a complete tragedy. I share with some of the words of the member for Riverina, who said that the importance of mentioning the victims, I think, rather than simply including them in a group and saying, because they were very much individuals with individual families, individual communities who will now miss them very much. And so the immediate victims of the tragedy, Deputy Speaker, were Yixuan Cheng, a Chinese national, an economics student at Sydney University, aged only 27. Pikria Darchia, aged only 55. She was a mum, a grandmother and a well-known, respected artist, known locally very well. Ashlee Good, an osteopath, a new mum. She had baby Harriet, aged only 9 months. Ashlee herself was 38, and her story is now well known. When she was stabbed, she handed her baby to an unknown man and said, "Please look after my baby." And I think all of those of us who are parents can relate to that overwhelming sense of protection that comes when you're a parent. And so Ashlee paid the ultimate sacrifice, but baby Harriet will be okay from what we have heard. Dawn Singleton, aged only 25. She's an e-commerce student. She was a bride-to-be shopping for upcoming wedding. Faraz Tahir, he was a refugee from Pakistan. He was a Westfield security guard. He's aged only 30, and it was his first shift. And he tragically also lost his life. And Jade Young, she was an architect, a loving mother to 2 children, aged only 47. And of course, Deputy Speaker, they're all members of families, they're members of community groups. They've left behind grieving parents, siblings, partners, children, friends. And as I said, many, on behalf of my electorate, many of us go over to Bondi regularly. So any of us, I think, that are in Sydney could well and truly see that it could have been everybody, any of us. And I think that everybody, it seems, that I've spoken to seem to know somebody that day, probably because Westfield Bondi is such a large retail outlet. But I've heard people that knew a friend was there, or a friend of a colleague, or they knew a first responder. And so particularly, I think, when we move on to that, I want to mention the many others at Westfield that day who were working in the small businesses, they were retail workers. And many of them, without any thought for their own safety, sprang into action, tried to protect, first of all, their customers, tried to protect others, and they did that totally unselfishly. They demonstrated bravery, calmness, a sense of purpose, and a very strong sense of community. And as we speak of courage, Deputy Speaker, the acts of Silas Dupre and Damien Guerreau, sorry about my French, armed with chairs and a bollard, they thwarted the perpetrator, and probably we'll never know how many other lives were saved through their acts as well. And ultimately, of course, Deputy Speaker, the madness was finally stopped by the courage, decisiveness and strength of New South Wales Police Inspector Amy Scott, who confronted the assailant without any regard for her own safety. She obviously deserves to be recognised and commended, as do all members of the New South Wales Police who were there that day or have joined in or who have been a part of the process subsequently. Also, all of the first responders, the paramedics, the security agencies, the ambulance personnel and emergency services. There are also many health workers who are involved on that day and immediately afterwards, and we don't yet know, we won't know for a long time, the toll that it's taken on people who were there that day, the retail workers, the first responders, and so I do hope that in the days, weeks, months to come that they do all receive the mental health support that they will need. And we have, of course, often in I suppose, true Australian spirit, we often see that our character comes through. We do come together very well in times of despair, in times of great distress and hardship. And we saw our character on display following those events. We've seen the floral tributes. We've seen the many that attended the memorial services. We've seen the vigils held in and around Bondi, around the eastern suburbs, the countless messages on social media, and that is the way that Australians do behave in times of adversity, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, just to conclude, there were so many people at Bondi that day, people that will be impacted for a very long time, probably many forever. And I just wanted to say on behalf of my community in Hughes, I wanted to pay particular tribute to the victims, may they rest in peace, and extend compassion and sympathy to all those affected, and to let them know that they are in our thoughts today and will be into the future. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.